Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 111.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
We start out this show today, this is episode 111, with Sam Clements. Sam Clements works for a large VAR, and it was a chance to talk with him and find out, who might want to work for a value-added reseller or a systems integrator. Also had a discussion on how Brennan Martin from Canada went and transitioned from just being general IT to focus on Wi-Fi. Those were some good interviews. I appreciate the time they spent with me, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Main session.
Well, welcome, Sam. This is Keith Parsons talking with Sam Clements. We're on Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast. And
hello, Keith.
We'll be talking today about VARs, ISVs, vendors, customers, the whole bit. So how you doing, Sam?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the chance to come on and chat with you. Always a pleasure.
And give you a chance to not be on No Strings Attached.
Or that other one.
Or that other one that has lots of drinking. It's actually kind of fun watching Whiskey and Wireless, though. You get some different things going on there.
Yeah, it's a unique approach to the industry, that's for sure.
And a lot of people seem to love it, though. So, well, Mr. Sam, you work for a large integrator, and you're in a position where you kind of see three views of the world. You interface with vendors upstream, customers downstream, and that your ISV is big enough, you have a lot of people on your team. So you can see all three of those worlds, and I thought we could just talk about what it takes to succeed in each one of those.
Yeah, for sure. You could say that I live in the biggest example of the it depends world, because of course there's a million answers for any one question. But yeah, it's speaking in broad generalities. I absolutely love it, and you're right. There's a lot of dynamics to consider.
No wonder you keep always saying it depends.
Well, when you have a million customers, an exaggeration, of course, you tend to see a lot of different environments, and you tend to see use cases that vary wildly from customer to customer. And so yeah, it becomes a situation of, hey, I know we all want to do something, the best way, or, fill in the blank, but, our world is filled with corner cases. That's for sure.
So the black and white part of me just hates when you say gray things like that. There's the right way, and then you have to do something else. But yeah.
There's the right way, and then there's the way that the person who's paying you money wants it done.
Oh yeah, that whole money thing gets involved.
Yeah.
Well, if you were a new person coming into this industry, where would you start? Would you start, say, as a SE for a vendor, or for a VAR, or an end customer? Where do you think is a good place to start?
Well, I've been, I guess I would say that from my personal experience, I lived in the enterprise space for a little while, many moons ago, and then transitioned over to the VAR space and found that the exposure to the customer variety and to the manufacturer, the in-depth exposure to the manufacturer was really to my liking. So I would say that that when we look for people that are coming on board, we look across all talent pools, whether that be from, folks that are currently at manufacturers, at other VARs, in the traditional enterprise space, or even independent consultants. There's experience comes from all sorts of places, and I would say that we see value in all of those. And I would say that we've absolutely had we have talent working with us today that comes from basically every single one of those backgrounds. So I would say it's sort of less important about sort of where you start in the market, and I would say it's more important that you're demonstrating a level of passion and aptitude that I think is probably the rare thing that we look for.
And talking about finding people, a lot of people are like, I can teach you anything. What I can't teach you is passion, drive, energy, and intelligence. all the other
Yeah,
pieces come along. So
yeah, for sure. It's attitude, not aptitude. I think is one of the lovely phrases to be thrown around. If you have a good attitude and you can be taught, then the technology stuff follows. It's having that mindset of it's having a drive, it's having a passion for the technology. I think is one of the single most difficult things to identify in bringing a resource on board.
well, I'm gonna make a couple statements, then you can react. I see people who start in the enterprise side and they get a really good solid understanding of the business needs, but only from one vertical, either K-12 or edu or pharmaceutical, compared to people who work in an ISV or a VAR, see a wide range, and also get to see a wide range of vendors. And those who work as SEs for a vendor itself get super in-depth on a specific platform, but across a breadth of different customers. And each one of those three ways of seeing Wi-Fi gives you a different set of experience. And so I would recommend you do all three at some point in your career.
Yeah, for sure, and it's the tried and true problem of when all you wield is a hammer, all your problems look like nails. If you get too complacent or too comfortable or too fixated on a particular view of a solution or a technology or a customer, you tend to mold your reaction about solutions and about deployments around that worldview. Now there's an upside to that and there's a downside to that. The upside is that if you're comfortable in higher ed, you can go speak proficiently in front of higher eds. You understand common challenges, you understand common situations that they find themselves in, but you don't necessarily want to sort of shoehorn yourself into a solution that may not address a particular vertical's needs. And so there's absolutely a time and a place for being familiar in a vertical or with a solution or with a particular technology, but you've got to be willing and able to move outside of your comfort zone, and that's actually easy to find. It's identifying when you need to move outside of your comfort zone, I think, is the challenge. I think everybody sort of wants to say, yeah, well, I can talk about different vendors or different solutions or different technologies, but it's knowing when you have to do that as opposed to can you do it.
What would be a nice trigger of when?
Well, that's a great question, and I would say that it's going to vary customer by customer, and I would say that being able to take cues from customers, being able to take cues from manufacturers, having an open, honest perspective with yourself and your skills about what you can do, but B, about what the vendor that you are working with can do. We all like to think that there's a role of, well, I'm going to position the correct solution for the correct problem. The reality is, so in many times you end up having to be locked to one vendor or not, and so you have to take a look at a solution through a particular vendor's rose-colored glasses, if you will. You have to say, okay, well, I know I need.
I thought those were teal-colored glasses.
Well, I try to be as vendor agnostic as I can when I can, but yes, I would say that I know the Cisco product line very, very well, of course, and that's. There's risk and there's reward to that. The risk is that you don't want to shape your solutions to be 100% about a vendor. If that vendor is weak in a particular area, you want to be able to address those deficiencies. Having said that, Cisco as a vendor has far more solutions that fit far more verticals and far more use cases, I would say, than most any other manufacturer out there. So it's good in that I have a very, very large bucket of tools to pick from as I'm building a solution. But sometimes it can be overwhelming. How about this? Not sometimes, it can regularly be overwhelming, especially in Cisco land.
Well, and whichever vendor you pick, you have the same options. There's just so many to choose from. Which leads me to my next question, which is about generalist versus specialist. You could be so focused that you're an RF Wi-Fi design only and only design large public venues. You can get focused and more focused, and still there's enough work and there's enough knowledge that you could even say I'm indoor hockey arenas only. Or
Yeah.
you could be a generalist that does everything from, route switch, firewalls, WAN links, plus Wi-Fi. Both are needed. Both are useful, both in enterprise and VARs. What's your recommendation?
Well, my recommendation is to stay flexible.
It depends,
right?
I know.
It depends, yes. I'm trying not to say that too terribly regularly, but yeah, it absolutely does in that you want to find, you have a responsibility to yourself and to your family to have a good job. And if you can find a good job that allows you to be passionate about a particular technology or a particular vertical or a deployment style in a particular technology, and you're flexible enough to go where that demand is at, man, more power to you. I would say that if I look back, in the past 10 years or so, or 15 years of Wi-Fi, and say, okay, how many people were sort of hyper specialists in a particular field then that still exist now? The answer is practically none. At least none that are in the same specialist, if you will. But if I look back and I
because they got bored, or because that specialty went away?
I would say 9 times out of 10, it's because the specialty went away. How many people were really good at coverage-only models? A whole lot of people, because that was the focus. Good or bad, the reality was that we really didn't care about capacity. Now that's obviously a very contrived response, but if you can do stadiums today and you can go where the work is at, that's fantastic. But I would say don't shoehorn yourself into one vertical for too terribly long. There are a finite number of stadiums in the country, and unless you're looking at being a global resource, then maybe that's not such a great idea.
And if you love travel, which also leads nice segue into the next question on working for any one of those three, enterprise, ISV, or vendor. I see them all three as having slightly different travel needs. Usually, as an enterprise, you have an office to work in. As an ISV, you're going out to customers, which may be regionally or global, depending on what your ISV's job is. And as a vendor, you usually have a patch, some state, sub-state, maybe two states. In your world, the people you hire and work with on your mobility team, what's the travel kind of requirements they might be looking at?
Well, I would say it varies. Everything from, we have engineers that stay in their local patch, 95% of the time, where they're, shall we say, less than 30 miles from the office, if you will. And then the flip side of that coin is we have engineers who travel, 50 to 75%. And that's, by travel, I mean, get on a plane and go parachute in somewhere. I would say that
really, you guys parachute? How fun!
Yeah. Back on one of those big military planes. No, meaning obviously, jump on a plane and go rescue somebody or go do a fill in the blank, and that of course is going to vary by territory. Where I'm at here in Tennessee, it's a long state, and so having to go 30 miles outside of the office isn't uncommon. If Memphis is 3 hours to the left and Knoxville's 4 hours to the right, then you're going to find yourself in those areas. If you go into Southern California or North Florida or South Florida, those areas are going to be in large major metropolitan areas, and I would say that those resources tend to stay local to the area more often than not. But yeah, it's I would say if you're looking at getting into the ISV or the VAR space, and travel's a concern for you, don't sell yourself short by sort of disregarding it in the vetting process. Make sure that you're upfront with your hiring manager. Make sure you're upfront with your recruiter, your HR specialist, or whatever. And if that's a concern, then you've got to stay that up front. I would say in large VARs, there's plenty of space for people to tackle all sorts of travel. We've got folks that do international travel. We've got folks that only do in-state travel. We have folks that travel just in the country, and then we have folks who don't travel next to anything at all. And
that's fairly negotiable, as in when you're getting hired. I mean, I'm assuming after you get hired, it might be less negotiable.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that the company that I work for is flexible, especially in the face of life changes, right? I would say that nothing's written in stone unless it's written in stone. Which is a very Zen approach. But I would say that yeah, if you have life needs that keep you that where you need to stay at home, you have a special needs family, or you've got a large whatever life situation that you need to be dealing with for 2 years, then you need to be upfront with and I would say that's across the board, right? That's whether it's manufacturer, enterprise, or VAR. Just generally, as you're negotiating whatever career change you're looking for, you need to be upfront with the people who are bringing you on board, and then hopefully look for somebody who can be flexible in the event that you do have a life change. For me, it was when I started, I was not married, and then I got married, and then I had a kid, and then I had another kid. And so I've been through, 3 major life events at the organization that I work for, and they've been very, very flexible for me. That's important to me. And I would say that falls in that big checklist in the sky of sort of pros and cons about your career. That's a big checkbox for me.
That you were looking for that flexibility.
Yeah, for sure. And having said that, I didn't realize I was looking for that flexibility when I came on board. It was a pleasant surprise when I needed the flexibility and was able to get it. Not that I wasn't expecting it, but it was nice that the organization that I happened to work for was supportive of me and my life needs.
Well, thank you for that. We all need to be look at things more than just the technology we're around. You have another podcast, No Strings Attached. Love it.
No Strings Attached show. No Strings Attached is that's a different organization. Yeah.
There is an organization called No Strings Attached.
It may or may not be a dating site.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. You don't want to go to that one. No. Or maybe you do. I don't know.
You never know. So, the question I've been asking people on the podcast, as we went from classic to B, A, G, N, AC, wave 1, wave 2, and leading into AX, the complexity is getting extraordinary. How do you see that affecting people who are in the industry and need to learn how these things work? Or are we going to end up just having AI do it all for us?
I guess.
And obviously that's not a binary question. It was just to lead you into it.
Yeah, I guess when I look at Moore's law, which is ultimately driving complexity and speeds and feeds and bigger, better, faster for same or less money, I guess I look around and I see that this isn't the first time in technology that this has happened. Compare the 286 days, 386 days of PC computing, and look at how that world has evolved over the past 10, 15 years, and say the world that we live in today from a compute perspective is vastly different than what it was when it started off. That doesn't mean that if you're looking to jump into compute today, you need to go back and have a history lesson on how an 286 worked. You need to understand the technology that you're operating in today, I would say within the confines of how it's being used in your organization. In my book,
back up though, just looking at that statement. Years ago, I was in servers, compact server. They have a certification called ACE, and what we learned in servers then is still applicable to servers today. 15, 20 years ago, when I had an IBM AT, I used Microsoft Excel. I use Excel today. It just happens to be on a tablet with a way better processor. So I agree that the computing powers move forward, but the actual use of how you use it hasn't changed that much. Whereas the difference between the understanding B and N and AC and then AX, that's a huge change in actually how we do our jobs.
For sure, but when was the last time you bought your Surface tablet or your brand new MacBook Air and you had to open it up and configure a dip switch or an IRQ setting or a DMA address or anything along those lines? The reality is that you don't. And while we preserve use cases as technology evolves, such as spreadsheets, you're certainly not using Excel 1.0, the same version that you were using way back in the day. I would say that from a usage model perspective, our technology is likely to not change all that much. We still want to get online. We still want to get an IP address. We still want to surf the web. We still want to download files. We still want to get where we're going as fast as we can get there. But I think that the complexities underneath the hood at some point will evolve that to a point where you're going to see the specializations probably start to diminish or start to peter off some. It's not going to be an overnight switch, though. Much like there wasn't a line in the sand that said, "Hey, from this date forward, nobody ever has to configure a DMA address on their sound card." It'll be a gradual evolution, and I think that as it occurs, we will all see it happen. I think that as people stop doing stupid things in technology, we're going to start seeing easier paths forward. And unfortunately, I think that's a bit of ways off, especially in our world, especially when you look at things like the IEEE kowtowing to 2.4 gigahertz support for 802.11ax. When we continue to see those stupid trends continually forced back down our throats, we're going to be stuck in the days of doing all this stuff in some sort of a manually intensive fashion for years to come. We did take a good strong step forward with AC being 5 gigahertz only, of course. But I don't think that Wi-Fi as a technology is going to hit that curve where the technology specialist falls off anytime soon. I mean, it used to be you would go to a PC store and have them install Excel on your computer if you didn't know how to do it. That's not the case anymore. I would say it's rarely the case anymore. We'll get there no time soon. Yeah,
that was kind of where I was leading with the whole AI part. I like your example of the DMA and the IRQs. I mean, that's how we had to set things. I'm showing my age here, but I was a 3Com wizard. Woo. Back when 3Com made their own NICs and everything, and we would have to set MAC addresses with dip switches.
Yep.
And now that's automatic, and I see that change. But that was a very simple thing. Setting IRQs was a very discrete function. I mean, there's only so many choices. Even when it came to auto setting up your serial ports, and you could build a little cable, there's still only 9 pins in there. With AX, the number of nerd knobs is huge. And to automate that, I think, is going to be about the only way we can do it. But right now, it's not even working.
Well, right. You'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. And I think that we like to fixate on what's coming next, sometimes almost to the point of detriment. I mean, it wasn't as 802.11n was becoming ratified officially by the IEEE that people had already started talking about AC and AD. It wasn't until we started to first see some of those products just start coming on the market that people were talking about AX. We're always looking to what's coming next, and people are already starting to talk now about what's coming after AX. How do we get to bigger and better and faster? And we haven't even started to digest the things that are coming, on the horizon. It's not the world that we lived in 15 years ago, that's for sure. And yet, we still meet people and teach them the basics just like we did 15 years ago. That's right. That's right.
The basics. In fact, just this week I was giving a presentation for a company, and I looked back at my slide deck when I was done. It was just a little hour and a half long little presentation on kind of how Wi-Fi works, and I realized that 90% of the slides hadn't changed in 15 years, and yet people were still like, "That's how it works." So yeah, we still have a long way to go.
For sure, and I'm not sure if it's the reluctance to understand it because it's invisible. I don't know what it is, but you're 100% spot on that. I would say that 80 to 90% of problems in the Wi-Fi world today can be fixed by a smattering of best practices and logic.
It depends.
Yeah,
that was my chance to get that in there.
Yeah. But I agree.
The other issue with that is when we look at those old things that haven't changed and they're still the thing, I like to look at this idea as a positive spin rather than we just don't want to see it. I think it's more rising tide floats all boats, or we have a bigger pie. So the amount of people getting into Wi-Fi is so much bigger than it was 15 years ago that the newbies still have to learn the new stuff. So I see it as a positive thing that it's actually getting bigger. It's a bigger market.
Yeah, but they don't have to know everything, right? When was the last time you taught a class and actually dug into how WEP worked?
Gratefully, a long time.
So there you go,
right?
right? Yeah,
that one thing
we
didn't
evolved.
matter.
Yeah.
But the thing that I teach more now than I did in the past was how modulations worked. We had just had some simple modulations back with B and G. Well, even pre-G, just B, we had really simple modulations, and we added OFDM, and then all of a sudden, we didn't really need to know how QAM worked. And now it's the whole MCS thing is why am I connected at this rate? I had this little experience. I'll just run you past some data and get your feedback on this. Looking at about 2 months worth of data for 50 clients, wherever they went, they had an agent on them just tracking what they did. And the data came back to show, and we were looking to say, are MacBooks faster than Lenovo on average? They go to, they go home, they go to a coffee shop, they go to work, whatever.
Right.
And we were looking at their numbers and sorted them by connected data rate. And they were averaging 210, 270, 300, something in that range was their average connected data rate. And then we looked at iPhones, iPads, tablets of all kinds, and they were all obviously slower numbers. They were less capable clients. But the crazy part was when we looked at the net throughput, the actual frames that were transported, they were all across the board, whether it was a MacBook or an iPhone, between 7 and 8 meg. It was a little shocking to see that we push and we hunt for these high speeds in the air, and yet the net throughput, the end user experience was almost identical.
There's
you haven't seen any data that kind of supports that. It was the first time I saw that data put out that way, and it just kind of surprised me.
Yeah, so I did I did not too many years ago. This is not too terribly long ago. I did a healthcare deployment that was 802.11n, so it wasn't AC gear, but it was 802.11n, and it was pervasive throughout a particular healthcare campus, and it was not a massive number of APs. It was like a 220 or so APs, and it was controllers and centralized data plane and multiple uplinks in the controllers. And there was, of course, the big conversation about, hey, if I've got these APs, it'll do 450 megabits per second times 2 radios times 200 and some odd APs, and I'm going to bring all that back to the controller and the bottleneck. And there was all this back and forth. And after we did the deployment and the turnup, after it had gone live and it had been operational for many, many months, we went back and revisited data plane. And this was a deployment that supported voice over IP on Wi-Fi on Cisco phones, workstations on wheels, guest traffic, EMR applications, and regular file and print services. And the entire deployment peaked on average at around 5 megabits per second at the controller.
You're like, that's it?
That's it.
And this was centralized data plane?
Centralized data plane back at the controller. Yep. And so we could go to the controller and say, how many bits have you been pushing? And it wasn't a lot. So, and of course, that's obviously one very contrived example, but you paint a very, very clear picture of it's not about the link speed, although we like to chase the link speed. We oversubscribe or we underutilize our links, our internet circuits, our bandwidth, our 10 megabit, 100 megabit, gigabit connections, 10 gig, 40 gig connections. They largely sit idle most of the day. Broad generalization, right? I don't think that it's the average traffic though that matters. I think it's bursty. I would say that if you look at any highway, look at the 10 freeway that goes from the West Coast to the East Coast, it has somewhere between a 55 to 75 mile per hour speed limit. And I would say most of the days that highway sits not 100% utilized with vehicles doing, 65 miles an hour down the road. It's just the way pipes work. Fortunately, right? You could compare it to plumbing, and you want to be thankful that those pipes sit idle all day long.
Yeah, we like that. Other than there is the example. I was at a hotel. You had a place called the Digital Oasis outside of Dubai. It was the center where all the high-tech companies were, and there's a hotel in the middle of that. And they had brand spanking new 802.11 AC Wave 2 APs, top of the line, My Mac was connected at 1.3 gig.
Spared no expense.
The AP was in my room.
Right.
It was fantastic. And I had all 3 streams. It was just fantastic. And when I did a speed test, I was getting 52K.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So the air was fine.
I would say so.
There was another pipe that wasn't working.
It was a lot finer than the rest of the plumbing, that's for sure.
Yeah, so let's do all this and not have any sewer lines at all. So
yeah,
well,
it's people doing stupid things, right?
Yeah, it happens all the time. Well, sorry I didn't mean to go so long, but you're easy to talk to.
I appreciate that, as are you.
You are on the web. You have blog. You have LinkedIn.
Yeah, I do everything but Facebook.
So how will someone find you?
So the easiest thing to do would be on Twitter, which is at Samuel_Clements. The old-fashioned email. I have sclements@gmail.com. If you ask nicely, I'll probably even just give you my phone number. You can call me. My blog is at sc-wifi.com. And then, as you said before, the nostringsattached.show.com. And then, of course, Whiskey and Wireless.
Oh, yeah. Got to remember that. I just have to admit here in front of everyone publicly, I saw your scwifi.com for years. I went to it, looked at it, and I didn't know it was Sam Clements. I didn't get the SC. I thought it was kind of like sci-fi, sci-wi-fi.
Yeah.
Yeah, it took me years, and there was like this epiphany, and I just went, I cannot believe I was so dumb. So,
SC. Yeah.
SC.
Sam Clements. Yes.
There you go. Well, thanks for your time, Sam. And
My pleasure.
See you at we'll be at Mobility Field Day next week, and then at conferences, and see you around.
Fantastic. Thanks for the time.
Thanks. Bye.
Divergent Dynamics with Devin Akin.
Today we're going to talk about channel widths. In 2.4 gigahertz, just stick with 20 megahertz channels. 40 megahertz channels are never acceptable in 2.4 gigahertz in enterprise Wi-Fi because there's simply too many other 2.4 gigahertz systems out there that will be causing interference. In 5 gigahertz, feel free to use as wide of a channel as you can get away with without having co-channel interference. Now that's a pretty broad statement. In branch offices and home offices, this may be 20 or 40 or 80 megahertz depending on the amount of interference sources from Wi-Fi and non-Wi-Fi systems. For 40 and 80 megahertz wide channels, make sure that your spectrum is fairly clean and that you don't need very many APs in that location. In most enterprises, in order to avoid co-channel interference, you will need to stick to 20 meg channels. That's going to maximize your capacity and your user experience. Each channel is a contention domain or a collision domain, and so 20 meg channels gives you the largest number of channels and therefore the largest overall capacity. In your channel plan, you'll see that the more channels you have, the further you can separate same channel APs. Remember that there can only be one simultaneous transmitter per channel. And one last thing, it's that doubling your channel width increases your noise floor by 3 dB across the entire channel. So, going from 20 megahertz to 40 megahertz channels will increase your noise floor by 3 dB, and so will going from 40 to 80 megahertz channel widths. Increasing the noise floor by 3 dB for every doubling of channel width will cause an equal reduction in SNR, which is used for your data rate selection for transmission. Thank you.
WLAN interview.
Brendan, how are you?
I'm good, Keith. How are you?
I'm well. No complaints. So I heard you just got out of a potash mine.
Yeah, I wasn't actually underground in this particular visit, but it's a pretty regular occurrence for me. I'm really familiar with it's about 4.5-hour drive from my home city, and I spent quite a bit of time. In fact, the industrial mining environment is probably the environment I'm most familiar with as an IT professional. Well,
it's good that you have a specialty and that they love you and pay you really well. I don't know about the 4.5-hour drive bit, but you get to talk on podcasts while you drive.
Yeah, this is an excellent use of my time. I'm usually doing far less productive things.
Well, I wanted to interview and have some people, hear your wonderful Canadian accent, but wanted to talk about your experience over the last couple of years. You've been doing IT and wireless for a long time, and then in the last year and a half, 2 years, you kind of got onto the social media scene, became a CBNE, and even produced the 802.11 EH little stickers. Yeah, that's some big change in your career in the last 2 years. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, certainly. And you've got it right on the nose there. It's been quite a change. And like you said, I've been doing IT work. I'm a network engineer, primarily for 12, 13 years now as a consultant, usually with VARs of various types. And wireless was always something that I did. Never really felt that I had a really good grasp on it, and certainly not to the extent that I did with wired networking, for lack of a better term. And when I finished my CCIE, I kind of figured, what am I going to do next? And I really, went back to that thought of not really understanding wireless to the extent I wanted to, and started looking around for resources and stumbled onto things like the CWNP program. And I knew a couple of these people in the community, at least, by reputation. So I had followed yourself for a while. I found I think the WLAN Pros website a while back, Andrew Von Naj's website, and of course, Rashka, Mr. N CCIEW. And so had kind of, been aware of some of the people in the community. Wasn't really a big Twitter guy, or if I was kind of more of a silent lurker than a participant. And the kind of catalyst for me was I attended, your ECSE course in San Jose, it used to be almost 2 years ago now, and met at the same time Blake Croney, and we were chatting a little bit, and I remember
Dave Westcott was in that class too, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a real, it was a bit of a celebrity moment for me, certainly. Before I kind of met everybody, I got kind of a triple threat. I was excited enough to be, having an opportunity to meet you and learn from you, and was quite, pleased when it turned out that I was getting, 3 for the price of 1 there. So, that turned out great. We've, had lots of experiences since then, but I remember in class, oddly enough, hopefully I'm not getting Blake in trouble, but he actually sent me a DM on Twitter saying, "Do you have a blog?" And of course, my answer at the time was no, but I knew exactly what he was getting at, and I knew that as per the CWNP requirements, that was one of the things that they look for, for participation in the community, to be publishing, written material, and I'd kind of thought a few times about saying I should probably invest in at least that. It's a fairly simple thing to get started. And so when Blake asked me that and I had to answer no, I felt that was kind of a bit of a push forward. It's time for me to really maybe engage in the community a little more actively.
Well, in the last 2 years, you've come quite a ways.
Yeah, and I work for clients and I sign NDAs all the time, and I'm not really supposed to share a lot of information, certainly proprietary information or competitive information about them. So I've been used to kind of keeping quiet for a long time, but I managed to find a good balance, and certainly the interactions with the community, which we talk about a lot as a community, have really been beneficial. The people I've met, the things I've learned, and the knowledge I've been able to share, I finally feel like I'm able to some extent to give back and help other people learn. Like you said, I've got a specialty. Everybody's got their own unique experience and can, offer something to the community for those people who, don't have similar experiences. So I've been, humbled, and also fortunate to be able to, learn a lot from the community as well as give back more recently.
Well, one way you gave back was 802.11EH. And how are we supposed to pronounce that?
802.11H?
Of course, with a nice Canadian flag there on there too.
With the the Canadian flag, of course, is important. And A as a Canadianism is really quite a versatile term. In fact, really it's one of those words that has different meanings depending on how you pronounce it. So that's been quite a little meme that's taken on a bit of its own life that I didn't expect. I certainly didn't expect to be kind of known for that. But I need to properly give credit where credit is due. And the story there is that I used to have a different Twitter handle. And if you don't know, I'm Canadian Beacon on Twitter. A little play there on Canadian Bacon, but that's CDN Beacon. But I used to have a different handle. And last year at Cisco Live, where I met Mitch Dickey, which is Mr. Single Channel Architecture there, Badgerfi, and Rob Boardman, Rob404, Rob_404 on Twitter. I was talking about changing my Twitter handle, and Mitch, beautiful Mitch from Virginia there with his own sweet accent, came up with this 802.11a. He was quite taken with, my accent, which of course I can't hear. I thought was quite weird. So that was his idea for a term, and I kind of pocketed that, and then we started kind of using it more as a novelty account, and we made, some stickers up, and next thing you know, everybody wanted stickers and patches, and as you so eloquently pointed out at WLPC, now I'm known as the 802.11a guy. I think you said, now you're known for something, and I said, like, what, for, industrial mining? No, 802.11a, and I went, well, it's not really the intent I had, but it's been fun, and it's been a really good way again to interact with everybody and meet new people in the community.
You said something I didn't know about, and I've been to up there in the great wilds of Canada many times. I didn't know that A has multiple meanings depending on how you say it.
Well, certainly none of them are formalized, but it's a huh, and it's a yeah, and it's a for sure. It's one of those, what's the word? Acknowledgments, I guess. As it's a question mark, as well as a period, depending on the context. I'm sure it's not going to be in Oxford Dictionary anytime soon in that respect, but I don't notice most of the time that I say it, and that was one of the fun experiences last year at Cisco Live. Getting to know Mitch was listening to all the things that he said that I caught, and he caught me saying things all the time that he didn't recognize. And of course, the two popular ones, or ones that everybody knows, is A, and the bunny hug thing, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but I'm trying to explain to everybody in the last 2 years what a bunny hug is as well. Do you know what a bunny hug is?
I do not. Explain to us what a bunny hug is.
So, it's not so much a Canadianism as a Saskatchewanism. Saskatchewan is the province that I grew up in and is my home in Canada. And since I was a young lad all the way through my teenage years, I knew a bunny hug as the name for a hooded sweatshirt. Most of you people I know call it a hoodie. I had never heard the term hoodie until I was. Yeah, I had never heard the term hoodie until I was, probably 16 or 17 years old. And so for me, that's perfectly normal. It's called a bunny hug. But it's very, very
I was imagining some actual event happening. You and Mitch together doing bunny hugging. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very odd thing, I understand. But for me, it's just the way things always were. And so I spend a lot of time now having to explain to people. Mitch actually now has a bunny hug from the University of Saskatchewan with the definition of bunny hug on it, which is, a hooded sweatshirt, but only in Saskatchewan. So we have other people in the Wi-Fi community from Canada who will be very quick to point out that this is not a Canadianism and is very specifically a Saskatchewanism because they find it very, very odd.
Well, I bet Mitch is fixing to wear it.
Yeah, I see every time he says fixing, I chuckle a little bit.
And so he's fixing to wear his bunny hug. Well, great. Being that you have this industrial mining experience, can you just share with us some of the tools you use that are specific to that arena? I know you use Ekahau and Wireshark and other things, but is there things that you need in that specific environment that we might not know about?
No, things are pretty standard, with the exception that ruggedized tools come in quite handy. The technicians and engineers who work on site, and particularly underground, all the time, have a lot of like Panasonic Toughbooks. There's and the new version of that is there's this manufacturer called GTAC, GETAC, and they make a heavily ruggedized laptop. Everything from phones to laptops, cameras have to be fairly heavily ruggedized, in particular because in mine machine potash, and I'm sure it's similar under industrial environments, but potash is mostly or in great part salt, right? And as we all know, salt likes to contribute to rust and corrosion quite significantly. And so I've had, switches, covered in salt. And actually access points is a good one. I think I had some pictures in my presentation at WLPC of APs, thankfully in NEMA enclosures with the antennas just kind of sticking out of the NEMA enclosure. And you couldn't even see the antennas because there was a pile of potash dust completely, engulfing the enclosure, which was not on the floor, mind you. So this dust and this salt settles on everything, and it's quite the corrosive substance. Usually it's not wet, but sometimes it does, and that of course makes things worse. So I'm used to kind of wiping dust off things, but my tools are fairly normal for the most part. I really appreciate my air check because it's a fairly robust tool, and is fairly, easy enough to wipe off, and I don't feel too scared about taking it underground. But things like my Proxim adapters, or I'm using a Surface Pro right now as my primary work machine, I get uncomfortable taking that underground without a case on it. And so, overall the tools are very similar, but I have to clean them more often.
What's the RF attenuation value of a couple inches of potash sitting on those?
Well,
antennas?
I would imagine it's enough. The APs work, but we tend to forget where they are. So the attenuation isn't terrible, right? We've checked before, and certainly we've been able to add a good 3 or 4 dB after we brush the APs off, within a couple of meters of it. But I think the worst part is usually having to remember where the APs are.
We all have that. Usually they just don't have that much dust on them. Question:
That's true,
you're both a CCIE and CWNE.
That's right.
Compare and contrast the two.
Well, certainly CCIE was a much more, technical details focus, and of course, Cisco specific, certification. Now, I laud Cisco very much for their certification program. They've always had excellent, study material, and have always dedicated quite a bit of their study material to theory. And so I had done CCNP wireless, for instance, before I did my CWNE. And so I grasped quite a bit of the theory, but ultimately the Cisco, certifications are geared towards implementing Cisco, hardware and Cisco networks. So like I had said earlier, I'd still through that felt like after, 10 years in the industry that I didn't really understand the nuts and bolts of, the 802.11 protocol, for instance. And that is really where the CWNP program really filled in a gap. And that's kind of really what I felt about the entire program. Right from CWNA, which I did before my CCIE, that really opened up, or I should say maybe filled in a lot of gaps in terms of everything from, antenna theory to some of the protocol analysis, bits. And so, the CWAP, the analysis professional course in particular at the time, was terribly in depth. And that's the kind of stuff that I really enjoyed and benefited from, right? Really, going through every single bit in protocol headers and every single field, and what does it do and how does the protocol act, and looking at packet captures was extremely helpful, especially, on this unbound protocol, which a lot of people don't understand when you're used to wired networking. Bits, traverse a single wire and nothing really interferes with it. And that, as you've talked on several times, having to think about APs more like, a one-port hub and a one-port switch makes a big difference in how things work. So the CWNE program is really great for digging into the depths of theory without being too concerned about which buttons to push on particular vendors. And so, I have enough years of experience, say, in building firewalls, that I have seen almost every type of firewall. When people call me up and say, how many Fortinet firewalls have you ever built in your life? It's, well, maybe a couple dozen. They go, oh, we've got a few hundred. I said, that's no problem. I can take care of that. Firewall, to me, at a certain point, is a firewall. That's, not so necessarily true at my experience level for wireless, but CWNE made a big difference in that respect, right? I feel much more capable now to understand what's going on when I look at, an Aruba network, or certainly when I'm opening, PCAPs or using my air check at the hotel and seeing the ruckus APs everywhere. I can tell when what's Ruckus's RRM called? I'm drawing a blank right now. Channel fly. I can tell when channel fly is in use on a Ruckus network just by looking at my G2. And so channel fly is specific to Ruckus, but it's an radio resource management protocol that I understand what's going on now, having never configured a Ruckus AP in my life, because of some of the things I learned in the CWNP program.
So it was just a year ago you took your CWAP class with Peter McKenzie. By the way, he's a great instructor for that. How much has that changed your actual work? Do you use packet capture as much in work since you took that class?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure I do. And again, it was one of those things where because I wasn't as well-versed as I wanted to, I was still, I will say, effective in building networks and troubleshooting problems, but I certainly went about them a different way, right? And a more roundabout way and a less efficient way. And now I'm not so scared of cracking open my MacBook Pro and going straight to the packet captures, right? I was much more used to before, like, let's see what I can see just inside the controller or just inside the switches as we get onto the wired network, or, going to the DHCP server to see if a lease has been assigned versus going, I'm going to just crack the MacBook open right here next to my client that's having problems and capture what's going on in the air. So yeah, that's definitely changed my workflows, absolutely.
So is that how you normally do packet captures now, just Wireshark on a MacBook?
Yeah, for sure. I have the copy of OmniPeak actually that we got as part of the deal with the CWAP course. But I find it takes a few extra seconds to kind of get set up, and it only runs on Windows, of course, and you need the adapters. And for me, it's a little easier to just kind of pull up my MacBook Pro, which I tend to have with me anyways, and go straight into, monitor mode capture because the driver supports it natively on the Mac. And I really enjoy some of the other tools like Wi-Fi Explorer and the rest of the tool sets from Adrian Granados. Was it Wi-Fi signal with the notifications that pop up to let you know that you've roamed? That is, that's such a nice feature, right? Being able to have just a quick, notification pop up says, hey, you've roamed to a different AP. It gets out of your way right away. I don't have to click on anything. Is fantastic for when, we're trying to figure out what's going on, or if we have coverage problems, or sticky client issues, just being able to use, my troubleshooting tool. And we talk so much about not being able to get the information we need out of client devices because we're so used to pulling information from the infrastructure that a simple tool like that, is so nice to see as professional being able to, work with a client device and get good information out of it. I love that tool.
I'm assuming you also use AirTool?
Yeah, absolutely.
For the front end,
I love
Wireshark,
being able to change
wonderful.
channels. Yeah, letting me change channels when Wireshark is already open, and I'm trying to figure out where a client is. Yeah, Adrian's tools, can't say enough good things about them. When he released Wi-Fi Explorer Pro last month out of beta, and I had been a beta user the whole time, I immediately forked over the cache and just got a license for it. He's doing wonderful work.
It's like, take my money.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I might have been number 2 purchaser after Sam Clements. I'm not entirely sure about that.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of us that the minute that it came live, it was just like, okay, got to buy it. If nothing more than just to pay back Adrian for all his other great tools he's given us.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if we could just get them all on iOS, wow, that's not happening though.
No, but what a difference that would be, eh? What a tool suddenly we'd be able to troubleshoot on maybe the most popular client device that there is.
It would make a huge difference, but I fear that's not in our future. Well, thank you for your time today. I know you've been driving, and you're gracious enough to take the time to call in. I mean, you had to call across the border even, so I mean, we're calling country to country here.
That's right.
Thanks for your time, and I hope you have a safe drive on the way home and get home to your family safe and sound.
Thanks, Keith. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Wireless LAN terminology.
Latency. The amount of time it takes for a packet to reach the receiving endpoint after being transmitted from the sending endpoint.
Well, we had 2 big interviews on this episode 111. Brennan Martin with his transition from IT to Wi-Fi, as well as an interview with Sam Clements on how to work, whether or not you'd like to work as a systems integrator of VAR. Thanks for listening to the episodes. We love your feedback, and we love to get lots of stars if you want to do those on either iTunes, or just tell us how it's going, either email or not. If you like what you heard, comment. If you didn't like, comment. Either way, we enjoy that you spent your time listening to this podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next week in next week's podcast.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.